Good morning. I'm Jason Ross, filling in for Harley Schlanger, and I'm here with your morning update for the LaRouche Organization for Monday, July 31st, 2023. Harley will be back in 2 weeks. The most important thing to say is that this Sunday, the International Peace Coalition will be holding the Humanity for Peace demonstration, or demonstrations around the world. The key event is a rally at the United Nations headquarters in New York City, followed by a requiem concert there to honor the 200,000 plus lives lost in the unnecessary nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As a reminder, this is something that we must never allow to happen again. Sister rallies are planned around the country and around the world, in Mexico, in Guatemala, in California, in Sweden, the UK, Germany, Romania, Chile, France, Malaysia, and more. The LaRouche organization is proud to be supporting this event, and I urge you to participate in one of these rallies or to organize your own and make it clear to the organizers of Humanity for Peace that you're doing that so they can put up an announcement. Humanityforpeace.net is the website. Even a small demonstration in your town or city can have a powerful moralizing effect on everybody who sees you. Finally, they might say, someone is standing up for this. And if you do this, take footage, take pictures, because the ability to share this internationally allows people around the world to say, hey, I'm not alone. There's a whole movement that is going to work to prevent us from descending into nuclear World War III, which would be the end of civilization. So while the Anglo-American NATO continues to push a policy that will inevitably, if continued, lead to nuclear war with Russia or China or both, other nations, other groupings in the world, including very prominently the LaRouche movement, are putting a new system in place. Two examples of this. First one, let's talk about the just concluded Russia-Africa summit held in St. Petersburg, Russia. Dozens of nations from the African continent participated, and President Putin had individual bilateral meetings with each of the 17 heads of state or government who attended, as well as with Dilma Rousseff, the head of the BRICS New Development Bank, and the chairman of the African Union Commission. 17 heads of state or government went to St. Petersburg. Now, that's down from the 43 who came to Russia in 2019 for the last Russia-Africa summit that they held before COVID. The presence of that many leaders in today's environment makes it clear that claims that Russia is isolating itself from the entire world are simply untrue, despite the enormous pressure that was brought to bear on these nations not to participate, not to send a high-level delegation. Dozens of nations did participate, 17 through their heads of state or government. The final statement of the Russia-Africa summit included these words. All our states, excuse me, all our states confirmed their commitment to the formation of a fair and democratic multipolar world order based on the universally recognized principles of international law and the UN Charter. They expressed their joint resolve to counter neocolonialism, the practice of using illegitimate sanctions, and attempts to undermine traditional moral values. Contrast that statement with the kind of pablum that came out of the US-Africa Leaders Summit in December of last year. Look at the use of these phrases, international law, the UN Charter. What was not said? The rules-based order. It's clear to increasing numbers of nations, pretty much everybody around the world at the top level, that what is being offered by NATO land is neocolonialism or colonialism, whereas the potential for a non-polar or non-unipolar, non-polar, sometimes said multipolar world for the future beckons, that this is where we can go. Let me quote briefly from two of the participants at the Russia-Africa summit. First, Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki got a lot of coverage for his strong statements. He said, there is no Russia-Ukraine war. This is a war declared by NATO on Russia. But not only Russia, NATO is for dominating the whole world. he said in his bilateral meeting with Putin. He called for a new financial architecture for the world. He said that Russia has a historic mission to play on behalf of everyone in the world. President Afwerki is particularly outspoken. He represents a country that has been subjected to, as he put it, sanctions, sanctions, sanctions for years, and he says that that kind of pressure will not cause uh, Eritrea to change its policy based on external demands, and it shouldn't be used. It's illegitimate. This was in the final statement. The use of sanctions in this way, using illegitimate sanctions, is unacceptable. Unacceptable. Some of the other outcomes of the summit included cooperation on agriculture, including direct exports of Russian agricultural products, including free of charge to half a dozen nations, the export of fertilizer, and very importantly, the export of machinery and know-how, as well as other forms of collaboration. Another quote from the conference. This is from Roland Lumumba, the son of slain DRC leader, Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. He said that despite the propaganda being carried out in Africa against the Russians, it is noticeable that it does not affect people as intended. With Russia, everything that happened was on an equal footing. And we do not forget that the USSR contributed to our freedom, helped some African countries to free themselves from the status of colonies. He contrasted the treatment afforded by Russia towards the African participants with the kind of reception that they get in the West, which has a colonial mindset. So one of the other aspects about this is the growth of new international fora for cooperation, for communication, for discussion. The most prominent one that I'd like to mention is the BRICS. The grouping, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, it may have to change its name because it is growing. Russia has said pretty clearly that at the next year's BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia is hosting it, that they expect there to be more than 5 members. China's foreign ministry recently said, quote, adding more members to BRICS is the political consensus of the 5 BRICS countries. There are reports that over a dozen African countries would like to join the BRICS, for example, and applications have already been submitted by many countries. Algeria, Argentina, Bahrain, Bangladesh, Belarus, Egypt, Ethiopia, Indonesia, very important for the non-aligned movement, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. What else is the BRICS doing? Well, they're working on new payment systems to be able to avoid the crippling effect of dollar-based US sanctions on international trade, to liberate nations from control by a system where one nation, the US, can essentially shut off your flow of trade by not allowing the use of dollars in achieving it. One example of move towards national currencies comes to us this week from Bolivia, which has just joined Brazil and Argentina in South America in implementing the use of the Chinese currency, the renminbi, in international trade, an unsanctionable currency, right? Meanwhile, let's talk about what's happening in the conflict centered in Ukraine. The war against Russia centered in Ukraine, it's not going well. One of the latest to state this publicly is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, which is essentially NATO's think tank, Professor Sean McFate. He says Zelensky is in a box. He can't win, but he can't afford to lose either. After all of these months of promises that if only Ukraine got the new wonder weapons, it'll be able to eject those Russians from Crimea and all of Ukraine's claimed territory. But despite that, this much vaunted, much ballyhooed spring offensive is not working. McFate says NATO is experiencing donor fatigue and disappointment with Zelensky's bluster. How many more weapons are nations facing budget problems of their own willing to throw into a conflict that's not going anywhere? And where, to be frank, every NATO weapon sent, every weapon sent from a NATO country, has the effect of killing more Ukrainians or leading to the deaths of more Ukrainians than it does Russians. You can think about where are these weapons aimed? Who are they actually striking indirectly in terms of continuing a conflict that's going very, very poorly for Ukraine? There are reports that the UK is training a top team of Ukrainian fighters to go for the reconquest of Crimea. This is insanity. And it goes along with the British think tank RUSI, Royal United Service Institute's idea that the best way to resolve this is to force the nuclear issue, to bring things right up to the brink of nuclear war and hope that Russia will blink. Part of that is by achieving some kind of military success in Crimea, of threatening Crimea and forcing Russia to respond in a more forceful way. These are the insane people directing policy in NATO land. Now, on the threat of nuclear war, I got to point this out. So, Secretary of State Blinken was in Australia. He was interviewed by 60 Minutes Australia about whether nuclear war or climate change represented a greater threat to humanity. Blinken, well, you can't have a hierarchy, he said. There are some things that are front and center, including political conflict, but there's no doubt that climate change represents an existential challenge to all of us. So for us, this is the existential challenge of our times. Now, what's behind the climate scare? This is a tool of colonialism. This is a tool to hold back development in the so-called developing world and also to destroy the industrialization of the so-called developed countries. Look at Germany, where industry is fleeing at an increasing rate due to the enormously high energy costs that Germany has as a result of its stupid green policies. The more your grid depends on intermittent, undispatchable power sources like wind and solar, the higher the systemic cost of providing reliable electricity. The systemic cost goes up, even if each individual windmill or whatever you would say has an energy payback. It doesn't because of what it does to the grid as a whole. So, the real way to deal with climate, which will change regardless of what we do, and we may have some impact on it, but look, we know it's going to change, right? And we know it's already difficult in many places today. What do we do about that? We develop. We develop climate resilience. We develop a human environment, a more welcoming, pleasant, healthy human environment. We build flood control, or we should. We build water treatment. We build wastewater treatment to have developed water sources that are safe for us to use. We develop energy grids to be able to protect the products of agriculture through refrigeration, through pest treatment, this sort of thing. We develop an energy network capable of supporting air conditioning for people, for their health, for their comfort. This is important. This is the kind of thing, if you're worried about climate, hey, we need to grow and develop so that we are less subject to the vagaries of nature. Last thing I want to mention before concluding is about the United States on the Department of the Misdeeds of the FBI. 3 of the 4 Newburgh 4 so-called defendants have been ordered to be released from prison, as a judge has said that the actual guilty party in the whole case was the government. So these supposed terrorists were recruited to a plot that would never have happened on its own, except for the fact that the FBI and its sources pushed it. They created the plot, then they swooped in to declare victory in keeping America safe from the FBI's plot for terrorism and murder, which would never have happened. This is entrapment. And this follows stories over the past couple of months of teenagers with histories of mental health difficulties or developmental disabilities being recruited by the FBI, by FBI sources, to participate in plots of the FBI or its sources' own design. And this is the sort of agency that would like the power to censor what you can read online. Just consider it. So let me wrap up. Again, August 6th, this coming Sunday, will be the Humanity for Peace rallies across the world with a central focus in Manhattan. That event will be live streamed. Humanityforpeace.net, that's spelling out the word FOR, humanityforpeace.net. That is the clearinghouse. So look there for events in your area and to submit an event of your own, which if you need help in coordinating it or making it happen, get in touch with us. We would love to help you organize your own event. We have a lot of experience with this sort of thing and we're here for you. Last thing, I ask you to please sign up and donate. Building on the number of supporting donors who commit to a monthly contribution is the best way to ensure that we're able to participate and lead events like those of August 6th. I ask you, please be generous. That concludes the report today. Again, Harley will be back in 2 weeks, but we will be having daily updates, so you'll get to meet some more of us during that time period. Thanks for watching.